Zoe, have the other panels been successful?
Yes, they've been going well. So
Okay. It's just this because of the nudity. Okay. Oh, okay.
Oh, the glorious 21st century.
Yeah.
Wow, you can show pornography.
You can shoot people and kill people on the street, but you can't show pictures of beauty, right?
Exact. That's the problem.
We're not sure now if it was nudity or music copyrighted content. So we're gonna look into it.
But I showed the same thing more or less. I'm looking the first time, so I don't understand.
We weren't live streaming before. We were just in the Zoom room privately. So
Message came up on my screen just as it went blank, saying it was canceled because of nudity. That was what popped up on my screen.
Sorry, this is a very small issue, but Bill, do you know that your name is coming up as GLS General? You might want to change that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know about this stuff. How do I do that?
Okay, go to the top 3 dots in your top right-hand screen.
3 dots. Gallery view? No.
If you put your cursor up there, and then it'll come down as menu saying rename, and you can rename yourself.
Oh, in the thumbnail, Bill, in the thumbnail.
Oh, here.
Sorry, I know it's a very minor point, but just
no, but right.
Can you see the thumbnail?
Edit my profile.
No, just does it not just say rename?
Oh, rename. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. I meant to do my name as well, and so I just did. So
sorry, I didn't spot yours wasn't right. Sorry, you're bottom of my screen.
As soon as you said that, I said, "Oops."
Apologies, I didn't see yours too.
No
Bill,
worries.
why don't you try again?
There we go.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great.
Okay, we're back. We're almost back on. Look.
We can start. We are posted in different places.
In a board meeting the other night, we had our first Zoom bomb that happened right at the end. So you can't tell what's happening, whether it's a disruptive group or whether it's YouTube.
Oh.
A lot's happening.
What happened in the bomb? So did
very disturbing white supremacy stuff.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's a whole campaign at this point.
Yeah. Oh.
Electronic campaign.
Okay, we should resume.
Thank you. So now we resume. Dear Artemis, please proceed.
Are we back live? Wonderful. So I'm glad we are back on stream. I want to introduce you to Anna Gillespie from England. Anna creates deep connections with nature and the natural in a shared biosphere, and now under volatile conditions through man-made environmental interventions. In her organic work, the individual is subsumed by the experience of melding with nature and merely being another beautiful product. Anna's new sculpture deals with the question of what it takes to recognize an individual as an individual, both in terms of being part of a mass of humanity and in the face of passing time. Her deep respect, sensibility, and empathy for her counterpart when working with models reflects on the close relationship between artist and muse and as an archetypal figure. Anna believes the muse can be understood as an internal force repeatedly attempting to materialize itself. Please, Anna, go ahead with your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Artemis. And may I say what a pleasure it is to be part of the festival. Thank you, everybody. As Artemis said, my name is Anna Gillespie and I'm a sculptor from the UK. Like most artists, I'm intrigued as to where inspiration comes from. And for many years, I've conceived it as a kind of gift that arrives, and that when it arrives, it needs to be taken seriously. Then a few years ago, I heard the phrase, never refuse the muse, which encapsulated some of these unformed thoughts. I don't know where I heard the phrase, and it could be seen as just a slick little catchphrase, but it has become something which I feel reflects a deeper learning for me, and something which also at times helps guide me. So what I'm going to do is explore these thoughts here about the connection between the concept of the muse, inspiration, and the idea of receiving a gift. And while I do so, I'm going to be showing you two films in the background. They are silent, and I'm hoping that my words and the images you see will mix in a way that captures the liminal feel that seems to characterize this subject for me. If we could play the film now, that would be fantastic. Thank you, Lana. So the film that we're playing now is called Body Mapping, and it was made just before lockdown. On one level, it's relevant to the discussion of the notion of the muse, simply because it involves me working with a model who I know very well and have worked with for over 16 years. I rather enjoy the way, though, that because we are both women, we are, I hope, in some way subverting the outmoded idea of the female muse coming under the gaze of the male artist. As both of us grow older and our bodies change, I also hope we subvert some of the notions of beauty and broaden them to encompass an aging beauty. I hope at points in the film you will also be able to recognise the bond between us. This is no unemotional process. You will see that we swap roles as to who is on the plinth. This was unplanned and simply occurred because a technician reached for something I could stand on. But the symbolism of it, for me, when I saw it, was very important. So here in this film, we have what one might call the embodied muse, a concept that is familiar from the last couple of centuries of artistry. The drawing itself was initiated from seeing the process of life drawing as a kind of mapping, which itself involved simply from someone giving me a concertina sketchpad and a casual remark by a fellow artist that I was making a map-like drawing. I was then coincidentally offered a gallery space which I had to fill for 1 week only and with no funding. And once the idea of making a body mapping drawing 11 meters long had popped into my head, I knew I had to implement it however daunting it was. I had, in other words, to not refuse the muse. And then the situation itself gave me another gift. It turned out that the gallery was right next to the River Thames, a river which coincidentally I had walked the length of in stages just the year before with a friend. And so quite naturally, the drawing became a mapping of the river form as much as it was of the individual woman I was drawing. The gift of a new way to work with and to meld both the human and non-human forms of nature was given. And as soon as I realized this, again, I had to enact it, not to refuse the muse. This gave the inspiration for the curved form of the drawing, which I didn't know would happen until the day I did it. This is the moment on the plinth, which I rather love, just to interject there. However, my experience that inspiration often comes from somewhere other than the self and other than from a physical source, such as a model, a landscape, or from looking at the works of other artists. I've often been asked, mostly by people who don't call themselves artists, how do you get your next idea? For me, I think like many artists, it's mostly a train of thought, each piece of work arising from the next, often out of a sense of discontentment with the last piece of work. It seems an endless search to get the work closer to that place one had not so much visualized, but that hovers at the edge of what vision is possible. It's about hard grind and keeping going. Small improvements, sometimes months or years, where the progress is almost vanishingly small. I believe it was Merce Cunningham who noted that luck comes to those who work hard. But there are moments where out of the blue, one suddenly thinks, what if I just do this? And the train of thought, the idea one has been chasing and developing, takes a leap forward that one had no idea was going to happen at that particular time, on that particular day, or in that particular way. One is surprised by the idea or thought, almost as if it had come from outside the self. Is this the muse at work? Now, whether one believes muses to be a phenomenon or not, it's interesting to explore the idea and might have some interesting and useful effects on one's practice. I recently came on an interesting TED talk that was given in 2009 by Elizabeth Gilbert. In it, she argues that we've internalized the notion that creativity and suffering are inherently linked, that artistry leads to anguish. The early death of many artists throughout the last 500 years is well known and perhaps even celebrated. She looks across time to see how people have managed the inherent emotional risks of creativity and describes the way in which in the classical world of ancient Greece, people do not believe that creativity came from humans so much as that creativity was a divine attendant spirit that came to humans. These disembodied creative spirits, daemons, geniuses, or muses, lived in the walls of the studios and came out to invisibly assist. This notion might be seen as a psychological construct to protect the artist from the result of the work. It protects against too much narcissism. The work is not entirely one's own. It protects against failure. Again, it's not entirely one's fault if the muse is asleep on the job or abandoned ones, she argues. And perhaps too, it protects against anxiety about public reactions to one's work. But with the Renaissance came the idea that the human was at the center of the world and that creativity comes from the self, the individual. Artists started being geniuses rather than having a genius. This is a huge responsibility on the fragile human psyche. And Elizabeth Gilbert argues that the unmanageable expectations of performance have been killing off artists ever since. I'm just going to pause in my argument while we look at the drawing. And I'd just like to note that this drawing was made, that the gallery was already painted grey, and I simply used a bit of chalk that one might use in a schoolroom. It was just the easiest thing to do, but then I realised that in fact I was using a piece of ancient earth in a way. So this has been made from chalk simply and water, again reflecting the river. And I really like the light touch in terms of carbon impact. I actually often work in bronze, which I'm painfully aware is carbon heavy. And this piece of work is much more ephemeral, much more light on the planet, and was painted over the week, immediately the exhibition shut. So there's something in that for me, this coming from the earth, this depiction. Now, oh yes, I must credit the model Deb and the filmmakers Peter and Ruben. Thank you. Now, the next film I'd like you to look at, I actually made over 10 years ago when I was working almost exclusively with found tree materials. And hopefully, while you enjoy this film, I'll continue the discussion about the muse and my thoughts on it. And in particular, how we can adapt this idea of a disembodied divine attendant spirit to today's world. One thing it might explain is a phenomenon I often experience. It seems to me that, paradoxically, the more personal a work I make, the more it expresses my unique experience, something that could appear small-minded, inward-looking, or maybe even selfish, the more likely I am to stumble on an archetype. And by this, I mean a piece of work that causes a profound and personal reaction in some of the viewers of that work, a heartfelt, non-intellectual, but powerful reaction. A second way in which the muse might be sort of conceived in a contemporary way is the way in which some pieces of work seem to express a zeitgeist. I think other artists will have experienced this when one thinks one is working alone without being aware of what other artists are doing. And when lo and behold, one comes across a piece of work that is at the core the same as one's own. On a lighter note, of course, this is particularly annoying if the artist is more well known than oneself, because one is immediately accused of copying and being like somebody. But in fact, the idea did originate with, well, the self or the muse. And a third way, which I'm interested in, this concept of muse might be sort of adapted, or in which we're already familiar with, in this terms of not all creativity coming from the self, is the way in which these days we are realizing the importance of collaboration. We all know that at its best, something seems to arise from collaboration, which is more than the sum of its parts. Collaboration also has the protective psychological shield, like the Muses did, of preventing too much hubris, or its opposite in terms of collapse due to failure. If we start with the idea that not all creativity comes from the self, one could perhaps work towards a collaborative conversation with this unknown outside force, this strange external thing which is not quite oneself, and yet perhaps only exists when the self is ready. In this sense, the classical idea of a muse being somewhere between the human and the gods seems to hold up for me. If there is such a spirit, it seems essential that one should honour it. One way to honour it is to work, to turn up in the studio and practice. If one is not doing one's bit, the spirit is unlikely to attend either. Again, I come back to Merce Cunningham's statement that luck visits those who work hard. Another way to honour it is not to refuse it, to accept the gift as precious. Do not refuse the muse. My fear or suspicion is that if one refused it too many times, perhaps for money, because one needs to continue making things that will sell, or perhaps from fear of disapproval of one's peers if one makes something out of kilter with one's normal body of work, that the muse might not deign to visit again. The work would continue, things would get made, but a kind of repetition and drying up can occur that we have all seen in the work of fellow artists and have to admit at times in our own work. I first came across the notion of gift in Lewis Hyde's classic book, The Gift, Imagination and the Erotic Life of Property. More recently, I've been reading Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. She says, gifts from the earth or from each other establish a particular relationship, an obligation to give, to receive, and to reciprocate. She is referring to gifts from the earth, which seems could well encompass the gift of inspiration, especially if one is willing to broaden one's concept of the divine to encompass more than simply the sky gods. In any case, these gifts cannot be bought or sold. The currency is gratitude and reciprocity. I've struggled in the last 5 years with the idea that I should be making work about the climate and biodiversity crisis. I have received the gift of life on this bountiful planet and should somehow do my bit through my artwork to reciprocate and honour this gift. But my muse has had other ideas, and my work has been much more about urban, human, political, psychological, and emotional issues. I have taken to political activism rather than art in order to play my part in helping bring about the changes that are needed. But the path of creativity is a long one, and I'm now once again trying to bring the Apollonian spirit into my work and achieve more of a balance between concern with the human form and concern with our natural world. It's an interesting thing, though, because once one entertains the concept of a muse, that not all creativity comes from the self, that there might be a disembodied force at work. If one accepts that, then one is not entirely in control of one's own work. I've recently moved studio and will start a new body of work. The studio is in the middle of the deep English countryside, but I have no idea what will emerge. I am not fully in control. And in this way, I believe that having a concept of the muse can also make our work more adventurous. We do not know what is going to be given to us. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Anna.
Thank you.
We continue with our Artemis Herber. Drawing on her Greek heritage, Artemis Herber has developed a vast variety of approaches in her quest to investigate how humans live in shared spheres under the current conditions on Earth. She explores the rise of Gaia in the context of myth in the polis writ large. In recent years, her travels and research have concentrated on artistic strategies on the Anthropocene, how human activities change the land, the environment, and life itself in our earthbound existence. Ancient myth, she believes, can observe events from the past through the connection between histories and politics, leading to a better understanding of the consequences for today and for future societies. As an alternative to other strategies, Artemis advocates a polis-centered way of mythological thinking as an artistic strategy for seeking a paradigm shift from economies to ecologies. Artemis?
Am I on share screening now or not? Share screen. Huh.
Your share screen? Not yet, Artemis.
Doesn't work.
Okay,
No.
we're on.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, first of all, just a moment, I have to go back. Sorry about that. Okay, good. Yes. So I would like to introduce my most recent work of the Gaia Rise cycle that has been exhibited at the Katzen Art Center of the American University Museum in the exhibition Landscape in an Eroded Field. And I want to talk about how my artistic practice fit the idea of the Muses' creative powers and inspiration, as well to the Apollonian spirit of nature and the environment. Narrow that inquiry into a more defined question: from where does inspiration come from? Or in a more common sense, what does it mean to be kissed by the Muses? Memnosyne probably would be the one I called to find inspiration for my work, as she is the mother of all Muses and daughter of Gaia, Mother Earth, the place where we are born, live, and die. We have to admit that Gaia is in a precarious condition with a fragile biosphere and all kinds of living earthbounders at risk of extinction. With the help of Memnosyne associated with memory and remembrance, the Titan and mother of all Muses, I artistically seek access to the deep strata of Greek myth, exploring ways to excavate, investigate, and revitalize what we have lost. Our deep connection with nature through the use and abuse of Gaia, along with her close and far relatives that are buried in deep time. Such endeavor explores the idea of polymorph, how deep time enforces complex issues of the critical zones all living species are bound together. As Zoe pointed out, programming in material culture, today I want to shift my focus towards the use of material and making art as a material-driven process of production. What might be of interest is that what we see as a result here in the museum setting is to ask where all the imagery, artistic expression, and examination of material works derive. So, how does the work evolve from here, what you see from our everyday life, my direct environment, from explorations, findings on the streets, in supermarkets, observations, even dumpster diving, and all other process-related inquiries such as research, writing, drafting, and drawing. So how does my work evolve from there to the execution and final installation, to the results we see on the walls of a museum, the designated seat of all Muses? I find inspiration in general from space, time, and material, especially in ancient myths and histories engaged in the questions of redefining concepts of landscape and nature, informed by multiple aspects of the Anthropocene, employing a comprehensive metaphorical language borrowed from Greek myth, their transformed and updated versions throughout history. The first two aspects, space and time, include space-related subcategories. Of interest are place, topoi, nature, and environments such as the urban, the natural, and the land or use of land. Time allows me to look back from the present into the past and question the future. History, myth, archaeology, philosophy, and the vast field of the Anthropocene that combines multiple disciplines in science infuse ideas, motives, and scenarios of my work in already complex interconnections between my current theme of the Gaia rise cycle on view. The Anthropocene basically deals with the consequences of our wasteful life, how mankind has created not only a geological strata through tectonic activities, but has invaded the complete Earth biosphere. How is the concept of waste transformed into art? Thinking about waste is obviously something that affects not our present, but also the future. Collecting cardboard, for example, and its transformation into artistic expression is a depiction of our way of life, a life of waste, a life of extorting resources, a life of exhausting land, our biosphere, and how we endanger the planet into a fragile and what Bruno Latour calls a critical zone. Produced waste affects everyone, anywhere. Even tiniest invisible particles carry the potential of cataclysmic events for the present and the future. The question is, what do we do with all that waste? And in fact, how could we aim for a paradigm shift away from economies towards ecologies? Now you know that my work is made from corrugated cardboard, which seems to me the most reasonable base that reflects on our state of living, but also marks a liminal state of a tipping point. Cardboard is the most omnipresent product of global consumerism. In the financial world, it's called the beige gold, while it also is recycled, partially natural, and at the same time manufactured, and at first sight, completely artless. Wasteful life and lifestyle is not something that is present, it actually comes from somewhere. For that reason, I tend to dig into the past, into history and myth, in order to find out how the past speaks to me and affects my or our life now and for the future. From where does the material comes from? The material that we produce, that we manufacture, and that has formed the present and produces the future. So producing art is material driven, but it also is based on observations. So I go on field trips, I attend residencies and make my on-site investigations and findings. I detect materials and places. And for example, the two photos you see were taken in the same area, in the same neighborhood. So by looking into the geological past with these beautiful erratics or boulders that come from deep time, I collect information in the field of the Anthropocene that basically is revealed in our construction or deconstruction sites. But I also like to shift my perspective and look at satellite imageries, how tectonic activities on Earth have changed our environment and the nature. All this is also explored through sketchwork and writings. Over the years, I have piled up many journals, just trying to understand what's going on. And all these writings and thoughts and sketches, they at the end pile up in the production of larger scale artwork. From these observations that I have been talking about, I found motivation to explore the material itself. There is this complicity between the artist and the material. I suggest 3 categories that are forming inspiration. It is contingency, improvisation, and experiment. Contingency is basically the precondition for improvisation and experiment of artistic possibilities and practices. Contingency describes the close interaction between the artist and the material, the capacity, potential, basically its autonomy. On the other side, there is the artist capacity or openness to engage with content, influencing or manipulating the material in various appearances and also unexpected outcomes. That's what we are looking for, maybe. My artistic creativity throughout any step in the process is infused through collected experiences. Within this complexity of interactions, thoughts of contingency are more and more confined until I accept possibilities of interactions and materiality. So you see how much enjoy a quite anonymous material while I'm trying to stay open to its influences and possibilities, and how I play with determination, make decisions and look into the potential capacities, my own and the materials to take further action. So you see some impressions from different works. Sometimes it's just the interaction between painting and deconstructing or the revealing the surface with corrugations. In the second row, you see how I actually not only metaphorically dig holes into several layers of cardboard. And in the lower section, you can also see how I explore possibilities to combine handmade or found objects with the material itself. In result, you see such work in Melancholia that attempt to create a metaphorical language that conveys how aesthetic praxis can confront the problematic of temporalities as an ongoing consideration of connections between art and environment. Those relations can be understood as engravings, patterns, and traces in our landscapes. And in that close-up photo, you also see that I prefer to use also materials that come from deep time, such as coal powder or oxidized pigments, referring to the strata of iron. As well, you see from where I get more inspiration, such as quarries that deal with mining and pits, and how I translate those experiences into the material by washing it out and folding and unfolding it to create wrinkles in time to process cardboard in a completely different way. Also, with that work, titled Earth Movers, I create an underlying tale of extortion, exhaust, mining, monoculture, and neglect, expressed in geological forms with materials that come from deep time, as well as a reminder from where we came from, but also what we have done to Mother Earth. Here you also see again sketches. Especially I was interested in this relationship between what's happening under Earth, producing aggregates, and in consequence, how we produce ozone depletion. Oh no. Okay, we skip that painting and move on. Looking into the past also includes museum visits where I find inspiration. I discovered a fascination for the connection between surface and geologies detected through broken parts and fragments of artifacts. Here you can see impressions from my historic residency in London, attending the British Museum and drawing collection. Of interest, especially was during my visit in the British Museum, the Parthenon frieze, figures of 3 goddesses from the east pediment of the Parthenon. Among others, one suggestion is that the two figures in the upper right photo are the personifications of the sea, Thalassa, and the lap of the earth, Gaia. Both figures inspired me to depict the suggestion of Gaia and Thalassa for another artwork titled Gaia's Memory. There is one image missing, and I don't know how to go back. Let me try. Yeah, here we are. Just a moment. Okay, good. No, something is wrong. So apparently it's deleted. I don't know why. There's so much going on today. So Gaia's Memory was for me one of my favorite paintings because it really refers to the chthonic deities, where we go deep into the earth, under the earth, and I create this correlation between the present, the past, and the future. And that way I try to compress time. So at the end, what are the muses to me? The muses offer and limit who are my motivation, providers, down-to-earth soul sisters, guides to discovery, and evoking my curiosity. They are my playmates that invite me to experiment on endless paths, on my hikes, jumps, falls, and escapes to Mount Parnassus. At the end, the muses will dance in my work as long as the artwork exists as evidence of artistic examination and all struggles within. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Artemis.
So I think it's time to introduce Judith Pratt. Judith Pratt is an installation artist who carefully interweaves history and identity into topographies. Her main interest in Central Virginia's Piedmont region, where she was born and raised, reflects racism concerns. Judith engages in issues of migration and immigration. Everyone has a point of origin, a geographic location, a personally held belief, or a cultural allegiance. Her ongoing theme of point of origin shapes and enriches each one in ways that last a lifetime. Her delicate, almost filigree structured drawings emerge into minimal sculptural environments and installations. Her commitment to points of origin she pursues on an ongoing basis is expanding into global concerns. Judith, you're welcome to start with your presentation.
As always, my thanks to Artemis for inviting me to join the festival today, and also to Zoe Lapis, to Lana Coley, and the staff at Harvard Center for Hellenic Studies. It's always a magical place to be involved with, and I thank you very much. As Artemis mentioned, everyone has a point of origin. It can be a geographical location, a personally held belief, or a cultural allegiance. Our points of origin include our sense of history, place, identity, and orientation to the rest of the world throughout our life. They shape and affect each of us in ways that can last a lifetime. The installation I'll be showing you today, titled Point of Origin, has been evolving for about 2.5 years and addresses these themes. It is part sculpture, part drawing, part theatrical set, and part visual journey that the artist and the viewer take together. Point of Origin illustrates the Greek mythological lessons of how beauty and tragedy often coexist and affect our lives in endless ways. Like Sisyphus, sometimes we triumph in our efforts, And other times we continue to roll the stone uphill only to have it roll back down again. By calling on the Greek gods and goddesses as contemporary metaphors for problem solving, we unite the human spirit with the artistic process and stimulate important conversations through our art. I'm starting here by showing you the first point of origin installation. It is rooted in Central Virginia. I come from Central Virginia, specifically the Piedmont region of the state. It's approximately 100 miles west of Washington, D.C., and it's a world apart from Washington. The region holds a complex memory of historical and political power issues, including being the home of 8 presidents, the front line of Civil War battles, and the extended use of slavery. And in keeping with that, today is June 19th, or what has become known as Juneteenth, which marks the abolishing of slavery and involuntary servitude in the US through the 13th Amendment to our Constitution. The Senate passed it in 1864, and the House passed it in 1865. And as you can see, as you know from the last several months, we have a long way to go. This callous history is paradoxically mixed with the Piedmont's great natural beauty, and I try to incorporate that in the installation. I hope to show you through this presentation how point of origin imprints our memories and translates the memory of this evidence through the artwork. What you are seeing here is a typical installation of the work. It's constructed mostly of paper and paper-related materials. I've chosen to use Lenox 100 paper, which is 100% cotton and made in the US. And it symbolizes the transgression that our country made to slaves in the labor that they had to endure in order to advance our industries in the US at the time. I hope to show you through this presentation how point of origin, I think I've already said this, imprints our memory and that translates the memory of the evidence through our artwork. It also includes acrylic paint, acrylic ink, foam core board, and wood. The installation is not intended to be a narrative story, but rather an attempt to give you, the viewer, a strong sense of psychological impact. The installation covers an area of approximately 25 feet long by 16 feet wide and 11 feet high. This next slide is a 5 by 5 foot drawing that you saw at the back of the installation in the previous slide. It serves as a topographical image or physical mapping of the Piedmont region that reinforces a sense of place. Ironically, it can look very controlled, but in fact, I just start at one place on the paper, and that is the point of departure. And I keep repeating line, not knowing where the line is going, and keep going until the whole 5 by foot image is covered in this evolving line. And ironically, it does look like the fields here in the area in the Piedmont. So in its own way, abstractly, it captures an essence of the importance of the land. Oh, I'm sorry. Each drawing takes approximately a week to 10 days to complete. On the right side of the first image, installation image that you saw, was another drawing. So I wanted to show that to you up close. And same process, but just completely different results, physically mapping the Piedmont region. Also, you saw these long vertical forms in the first installation, and they're intended as figure forms without being descriptive. They are witnesses. They can all be considered muses, and I consider them genderless muses, but they observe, they know the history, they know how it's been changed or not changed, and they know how things are going forward. and I give them this kind of quiet elegance in the installation. Just wanted to mention about the paper process. Each of these forms comes from one rectangular piece of paper. Nothing is added, nothing is taken away. I simply use a box cutter and cut vertical lines, or did in this case, cut vertical lines. And it was done on the floor of the studio. At the end of the day, the first one anyway, I just picked it up off the floor so it wouldn't be damaged, and put the push pin right at the top in the very center, lifted it up and pushed the pin into the wall, and gravity caused this configuration. I wasn't counting on it. It was one of the gifts that material gives to the artist when you're least expecting it. And so I just continued using it in different combinations of color and basically, and numbers. The greater the number, the assembly got greater. The smaller the number, it was just more of a private muse or witness. So it offered a lot of possibilities in the progression. I also wanted to show you that in the course of doing installation art, one of the things I love is you can keep reconfiguring it. And depending on the curator, the space, the venue, someone could ask you to just bring in a number of pieces, and then they look at them and they tell you what they want, and then ask you if you feel like you can recompose them in that space and find it still viable. And in this case, I really did, but 3 out of the 4 pieces here was used from that first slide that I showed you, your first installation. There is a progression in each of the forms. Again, I started with the tall vertical figure that you saw a couple of slides ago. But I wanted and that worked at the time, but I wanted to go someplace else with the idea of a figure. And for me, these are deconstructed figures. So again, the big sheet of paper gets cut and painted black on one side and a color on the other. As you may have noticed, black is used throughout the installation, and it references black or slave in that context. It also just references the gesture, the damage, the abuse to the figure in this context. So big piece of paper, black on one side, yellow on the other side, and then a schematic of cuts that just I sort of mathematically come up with an idea and go ahead and make the cuts. And at the end, I pick it up like I did the first one, push it into the wall. And in this case, it fell into this configuration. And I personally feel that this gesture that the paper creates is very expressive. And down at the bottom, you'll see another part of an installation. I like very much installing on the floor, because here in the Piedmont, the fields are very important, the rivers, the creeks are very important. So I wanted to make them a part of the installation too. Close-up of detail of that work. So again, you can kind of see how it creates all kinds of unexpected things, the shadows on the wall to the right. And how is gravity going to cause this particular one to configure itself? It's always a surprise. I love the contrast of the really laborious painting and cutting, and then toward the end, it sort of climaxes into hanging it and then seeing what the paper wants to do. Just another version. So I have several of these wall hung sculptures, and depending on the size, this one's 8 foot by 4.5 feet by about 1.5 foot projecting out from the wall. It's just fascinating, to me anyway, what this will equal and what kind of expression having to do with the theme and subject it'll carry out. This detail I'm showing you so you can get a glimpse of the paper, what happens when a series of paint is put on. It almost becomes leather-like. And then the importance of just the glimpse of the red on the other side that comes forward when you hang it, and it becomes a sculptural form rather than a two-dimensional form. And there's always a challenge. How much paint do I put on before it becomes too stiff and then the draping doesn't happen? So there's multiple challenges in doing all of this. Showing you this one, it kind of revealed itself to me backwards. So we just saw the left and the right hanging forms. This series, I'm working on this totem series now, and to me, it suggests more of a figure form that has not been abused or deconstructed. And I thought that was great, but somehow it just didn't seem right. So I cut it in half and put the box in the center part there. And I wasn't consciously thinking about it, but in the end, with all that's been going on in the last month and a half, that definitely has been absorbed by all of us. And I put the box in there and called the totem Neck, N-E-C-K, and it's in honor of George Floyd. This is the only horizontal piece I've done in the series, and it's on a white wedge, white wood wedge, and I just put 2 boxes in there. A lot of this is very unconsciously done. It looks precise, but there's just a lot of unconscious response to the material and the subject. So 2 boxes, top and bottom there, and then took the sheet that's usually hung on the wall and just wrapped it around the boxes. And it started to become a coffer or a coffin. So I've just left it at that. Just a quick glimpse of the studio. I collaborate with a lot of artists on many levels. I'm on the board of the Washington Sculptors Group, so that's a lot of people to collaborate with. But when I go into the studio, I close the door behind me and I live with these forms and work that way, and then enjoy very much taking it out into the public and getting public response. But the studio for me is private. And if you care to see some of the past work I've done, or just interest in what I've been doing or do, please feel free to go to my website and take a look. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Judith. We are approaching the final phase of our session today, and I would like to introduce you next to Marc Robage. Marc is also a DC-based artist, and he engages in the environment's issues with transdisciplinary works in the intersection of art, biology, metaphysics, and response to the natural world. His artworks pay homage to organic shapes, harmonizing natural colors, textures, and forms, a poetic response to each found object. He engages in local communities and with people of all ages. Many of his sculptures were made as a participatory project to create a site-specific work. Within the synergy and energy of creativeness, Marc inspires and finds inspiration through collective engagement. Marc conveys the healing power of art with compassion and care. His intention is to celebrate collaboration and our connection to Earth. Marc, you're welcome to start with your presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Artemis, for that kind introduction. I would like to add some of the sentiments that have been expressed about recognizing today as Juneteenth, and Black lives do matter, most definitely. And I was reading an article in the paper today how that some in the Black community feel like this day is their 4th of July, in the sense that this was the day that the last slaves down in Texas were freed, which was over 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. So my empathy and support goes out to the Black community and that cause. Apollo, we've spoken about Apollo as being the god of sun and light. We've also, it's useful to maybe think of him as the god of healing and of plagues. And certainly in this time, the last few months, in the last few weeks, definitely, we've been dealing with plagues, and certainly our country is taking more steps in the long march towards healing racism, and may that march come to full fruition soon. I would like to talk about a body of work that has to do with the Apollonian spirit of reverence for nature, as Artemis mentioned at the beginning of our presentation. This piece that you see here is actually a photograph of a hemlock tree in southwestern Virginia, where I did a residency with about 8 other artists, and also maybe 12.5 biologists. And this was an eye-opening experience to me, and the conversations between artists and scientists were quite beneficial. And what I would say is that I had the unique opportunity to be there at the same time as an esteemed mycologist from Duke, and he illuminated me in terms of many of the properties of fungus and mushrooms. One of the properties that they have is decomposing. They act as decomposers in the forest to break down material, which then creates the possibility for new life to evolve. And so this is a crucial function, and could be seen as maybe even a metaphor for the muse, in the sense that where does creativity spring from? And perhaps the fungi exist in that space as well, where they're breaking one thing down and then allowing the fertility of the earth to then bring forth new forms. That's one aspect of fungi that I learned about. The other thing that we talked about down there is known as the Wood Wide Web, which is the underground network of rhizomes that make up the fungi itself. The mushrooms that you see are actually the fruiting body, but the network of rhizomes that go underneath the forest actually connect the trees to one another and connect the forest in many different ways. It's being discovered that trees can actually communicate through this network with one another, and that nutrients can be moved from one place to another through this network. A very important function of connectivity. Finally, as everyone is fully aware, trees are a fantastic carbon sink. They eat carbon dioxide, which is so important in our greenhouse situation that we're in. And it turns out that they store most of the carbon, virtually 70% of it, in this network underground. And so this network served as a great carbon sink and collector as well. So when I came upon this piece in the forest, I was actually uncertain whether it was something that had been done by an artist in a previous residency, or whether it was something natural and grown. And that sense of wonder and questioning, and then a sense of wanting to investigate that and learn more about fungi and what they were about, led to all of those conversations that I was having with the biologists there. And it gave me a idea for a project that I could do where I wanted to connect people to themselves in terms of collaboration. I wanted people to collaborate together, and I wanted them to celebrate a connection to nature. And so I wrote a proposal for a project at Sandy Springs Museum over in Maryland. And I taught a class that involved ceramics production. We made about 3 dozen ceramic forms that were going to fit around a tree on the property. I had gotten the okay from the museum director that we could install some fungal forms, ceramic fungal forms, on a dying tree on the property. And the idea was that I would do it in such a way that once the ceramic forms were mounted on the tree, it would become unclear whether they had just grown that way or whether this was one of the art displays, art installations in the exhibit. And I named the piece Ode because I was honoring this place, this tree, this time, even the people that had helped create the work, the collaborators with me, the participants. But also I wanted to honor that original tree that I just showed you 2 slides ago, and hopefully spark that reaction in viewers where you had that moment of wonder. Is this art? Is it nature? Did somebody make it? Is it organic? And that kind of conversations with viewers who were viewing the work, in addition to some of the conversations that I was having with the people in the workshop, made me realize that these workshops really allowed the audience to relate to the art in a completely new way. It allowed them to become participants and part of the creative process, which is not just passively viewing the work, but actually being part of the work. And so I decided that I would expand this idea, and I wrote a grant in my hometown of Falls Church, Virginia, and I proposed a series of public participatory sculptures that would spring up in one of our parks, in which I taught about a dozen different workshops around the city. I titled the project Natural Wonders, and my goal was to be as inclusive as possible with the workshops and the people in attendance. I wanted to reach to all age groups. The workshops were free to allow anyone to sign up and come and participate. And I taught workshops in a number of the places that you can see in the poster, which included the library, the community center, all the schools from the kindergarten, first grade up to the high school, and also a senior center around town. And I'd like to share a little bit about this work with you as the talk continues. And one of the things that I wanted to say is that in working in the workshops themselves, the Greek word autotelic began to present itself in this way. Autotelic means that what you're doing is and of itself its own reward. It's an aspect of flow. And we've been talking about the muses and where does that creative instinct come from? And then where does that creative process take you? And I think this idea of flow, where you're engaged in an activity to the point that you lose a sense of yourself a little bit, time shifts. It seems to pass more quickly and simultaneously more slowly. And you're involved in this kind of altered state, which in some ways takes you out of yourself. And when you finish, you somehow paradoxically feel connected to something bigger. And this began to happen at the workshops. And I would talk about them with my high school students, who you see here, making clay forms. But I would also talk about it with some of the other participants. And so this first project is akin to the one that I showed previously, involving lichen forms that are going to sprout off of trees. Only in this case, the concept, the scale of the project was much larger. There were 6 ash trees that had been topped off. They were dying because of beetles, and the city okayed me for installing these ceramic mushrooms onto these tall trees. So we had to make about 6 dozen or so of these ceramic forms. You can see from this picture that some of the groups of people were extremely excited to take part in this project. This was over at the elementary school. And after school, we did a workshop, and they were absolutely besides themselves with wanting to participate in this project. And they were in charge of adding the color and the glaze to the ceramics. And one of the things that I enjoyed thoroughly about these workshops was tapping into the energy of the youth like this. Once we had the ceramic forms colored, it became time then to install them on the trees. And as I was saying, there were about 6 dozen of these things to install, the ceramic forms, and we needed to install them up quite high. So I was talking about the logistics with a city representative, and she suggested that maybe I contact a local Boy Scout troop to see if they might be interested in doing something like this because they're so project oriented. And so I did, and sure enough, I found a student who was an Eagle Scout and was looking for an environmentally related project to do for his Eagle Scout project, and talked with his father and the troop leader, and they got really excited about this project and made it happen really quickly. They got involved, and over the course of 2 weekends, we were actually able to install the ceramic forms as you see us doing here. And that resulted in this piece that you see now. This is 4 of the trees. You can see they're quite tall. They were ash trees, about 30 to maybe 40 feet tall. The mushrooms went up maybe 20-ish some odd feet on the form itself. And I titled this piece a little bit tongue-in-cheek, calling it Fungus Among Us. And this is another view of this sculpture, one in which art and life become intertwined. The stump that you see in the foreground is an actual stump with real fungi, brackets as the biologists would call them, sprouting off of it. And it was actually this stump that was the inspiration for my color palette and the kind of location of this piece. And I intentionally wanted art and life to mirror one another like this, because the big idea is that if people collaborate and work together, come together to celebrate their connection to nature, and if the art which is produced, art being a human activity, if this human activity is in harmony with the site and the environment to the extent that it is inseparable from it, does that suggest a way we might relate to one another in the world? In other words, it's not just trompe l'oeil, but it's about art and life intersecting. It's about us being meaningful in how we react and respond in what we do in the environment. And that was one of the big ideas behind really the whole project. I had a chance to work at a middle school, and in this middle school setting, there were some diverse needs, some special needs amongst some of the students. And we again worked on a different type of fungal form, a little bit more whimsical due to the age group. And we created this piece here, which is titled Morels, which again is a pun off of the word morels. And you can see that it's a fun, kind of whimsical installation. I think of Dr. Seuss a little bit when I look at this in terms of the way the forms move and kind of slide through space and are a little bit cartoonish. And you never can tell really what will happen out in the wilds. and a very discerning neighborhood cat happened along while I was installing and decided he would check out the goings on in the park and came to watch us. And I think he approved of the installation. But at any rate, the funny thing is in looking at his collar while I was petting him, turns out his name was Seuss, which I thought was actually perfect, as I was just saying that the form reminded me of that. And given that we are doing a presentation for Apollo and at the Hellenic Center, I think for the purposes of this talk, I will corrupt his name slightly to Zeus. So another project that I did involved, again, some of my high school students, and we made some forms that were completely different, more complex for their age group, more kind of pod-like and maybe mysterious in terms of what they are, still with a very animated quality. And that led to this piece here, which was called Homage, an homage to the magnificent log on which the clay forms kind of sprouted, and also an homage to the site. And again, when I titled it that, I was thinking of all the people that had come together to help make these sculptures possible, and I wanted to honor them as well. The last group that I want to talk about is a group of seniors. I mentioned before I did one workshop at the Senior Center, and it was a wonderful experience to conduct a workshop that included such a multi-generational group of people. My high school students came as aides, and there were some aides with the seniors as well. But it was a wonderful workshop where people really got into it. That idea, that autotelic idea of being involved in the project, in touch with yourself, in touch with the materials, in tune with what you were making and being in that moment. You can see that right here in this display of these two as they were adding color to a number of leaf forms that I had made with another group. And these rice paper leaf forms were something that the people that I was working with could manipulate and that the seniors could then paint. And that led to this piece here, which is called Fronds. It was an installation of 3 tall, slender, frond-like sculptures that were meant to catch the light and react to the light on site, kind of relating back to Apollo, again, as the god of sun and light. I intentionally worked with the sunlight. The positioning along the path was at a point of east-west orientation, so that when the sun rose in the morning, the leaves would illuminate with the morning light, and then in the afternoon, as the sun was setting, they would be illuminated again. The funny thing was also a note on the word collaboration, and maybe touching on what some of the artists have said about, is the artist in complete control of the piece, or where does the muse come from? I'll tell you that the exact position of these fronds was aided by a gentleman who happened to come across us while we were about to install the piece. And he looked at us and asked what we were up to. I explained, and then he wandered away about 20 feet away. And I had one idea for locating this piece just about 10 feet further back than where it is. He came back to me and he said, no, you actually need to move it right here. And he went and stood in the spot where the fronds are. And he said, it needs to go here because the sight line from the bridge is so much better. And I thought, I need to go see what this is about. And I went to the bridge, and sure enough, he was absolutely correct. And so I thank him very much for his contribution to the piece, and also to the muse for bringing him to me. And with that, I would like to conclude my talk and add my thanks to all the people who have made this possible, as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you to all artists attending today for your compassion, your hard work, and willingness to work on this project today. And now we are entering the stage for follow-up questions from our audience. And I give the word to Zoe with, again, many thanks to you all. And Zoe, I think there have been a question that seems to be very interesting to every one of us.
Yes, thank you. And indeed, thank you very much indeed to each of you, Bill, Iris, Anna, Artemis, Judith, Mark. It's been just truly a wonderful journey to go through your work and all the questions that you're posing, the explorations that you have been engaged in, and thank you very much for sharing with us truly these wonderful expressions of your work. Just in terms of questions, maybe we have time for truly one question addressed to all of you or each of you. That is, how does artistic expression and collaboration generate cultural exchange and public attention these times of endangered nature, democracy, and freedom? I think we saw some parts of that through your presentations. We saw answers to that, but if we can give it a few more thoughts, a few more sentences, that would be lovely for our audience. Please, Mark.
So that question really is at the heart of many of the projects that I've done that have been participatory in nature. And what I've found is that in doing these projects, there's a real hunger that people seem to have for connecting back to nature, number one, but also connecting to one another, number two, in these workshops. And there seems to be this longing for that connection to one another, to work towards something that's larger than yourself, to be part of a group bonding experience. And I've never been to a quilting bee, but I imagine that my workshops somehow relate to that quilting bee, and I say this because at these workshops, people end up talking to one another while they're working on the project, and they end up finding all sorts of connections. Oh, your daughter goes to that school, so does my daughter. Oh, they have the same teacher, as it turns out. Who would have known? That type of thing. Oh, you have a relation in Pittsburgh. Oh, I have a relation in Pittsburgh. And then they start talking about that. Oh, you're interested in mushrooms. So am I. I'm a biologist. And we get into a whole conversation. So this idea of, Judith mentioned point of origin, and I love that title. In some ways, I feel like these workshops have been a point of origin for connection to one another and back to the environment. And I really do think people are hungry for that at this particular time.
Oh, yes. Bill?
Just trying to think and put this together cohesively. Again, this part of Virginia has so many issues buried, and when you cut, I envy Mark because issues of race and gender and politics and historical fact incite a lot of problems in this area. However, it's a slow evolution. You've got a nice social evolution that is moving. Here it's taken well over a century, but with everything, Zoe, that's been going on in Washington and across the country with Black Lives Matter, for the very first time in this neighborhood where I am in Central Virginia, people came out, white, Black, Asian, and marched peacefully. So yes, and that's a collaboration that feeds my art anyway. It's not as direct as Mark's experience, But yes, all of this matters so much.
Can you hear me?
Here, Bill, please.
Yes, the DOOR project also embraces these kinds of activities because I don't feel that they're really complete until the public interacts with them. So there's, as I said, there's heartfelt expressions that people put on them. We had a show in Los Angeles once, and a guy walked up. It was on the sidewalk, and he said, "You mean I can write anything I want on this door?" I said, "Yes. It's not a virtual door. It's a real door, and you can write on it." And he was from Serbia, and he wrote some very long
Yeah.
felt expression. So it does complete the work, and
Yeah.
people are interactive.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill. We have just one more question. We can give you just a few moments, and I'll express it in response to our good audience member. Can you speak to technology and censorship as it relates to your conception of the muse in contemporary culture? Anna, please.
I'm sorry to be awkward, but actually, can I address the previous question?
Oh, absolutely.
Sorry, I didn't put my hand up. I, as an artist who normally doesn't work in a participatory manner, but who is more likely to make work and show it in a gallery context, I think I've seriously had to question how effective my art is in being part of the change that's needed. So for about 8 years, I made work out of tree materials, trying to, what I would describe as, breathe the beauty of the natural world into the built environment, to try as an appeal, you know, that we would, a deep eco sort of sense that we would take care of something we loved. And I actually feel I failed, that the work was sold very nicely, but it didn't make any difference. And that was, I really had to face up to that. And that I have felt myself to be much more effective in creating political change through directly being an activist. In London, being arrested as part of Extinction Rebellion. So I think for me, this is a very serious question. I appreciate people are answering it from different points of view, but if one wants to create political change, it seems as artists, one instantly thinks, oh, well, I should make art about this. And certainly everyone says to me, well, you must make your art about this. But it's just something I keep my eye on as, for me personally, that is that the most effective way I can do that? Or is it okay maybe as an artist to say that not everything I do as an artist has to be about political change, and I'm particularly interested in environmental change. Perhaps there's other ways outside one's being as an artist to work for change, and so that's it's a sort of ongoing thing I'm thinking about. I don't have an answer, but that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Iris, Artemis? Iris, let's unmute you, my dear. Let's unmute you. Unmute.
Yes, I like to answer to the question of censorship. I think we just lived through a censorship, and I'm always surprised how much we are bombarded in our times with war images, with pornography, with cruelty, aggression. And whenever we show a body in the full beauty of nudity, it gets censored. There's a big problem in our society that we glorify aggression, valorization, aggression, violation, and a lot of bad energies. And when you try to show the human body in the most beautiful power, we are cut and censored. Why is this? Why do we have this control on us? It means we want to cut the human being down. The human being is us, our body, our sexuality, our erotic. We are not allowed to be fulfilled in our own being. And there is a big, big problem in our society. And my work tries to work on it. So it's not easy, but I think there's a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Iris. Thank you so much.
Iris, I wanted to respond to that.
Yes.
I think your work is so brave and just so you don't hold back with your work. I think when we get a response like we did today, I mean, I don't think it speaks to a lot of people. I think it's just a few. I think probably those who watched this today were very appreciative, but it also shows how powerful the female body is, how powerful, and some people can't handle that, whether it's in art, you know. So I see it in a positive way, and I think do your work, do what you did. It's necessary, and don't take it as against you or your work.
No, I don't. But thank you, Judith. I appreciate. No, I don't take it. I
Good.
see like a complete control on us human beings. That's
Yeah.
what it is. In
I
fact.
consider the
But
power
all the
of it.
art, all the Greek art, we have all shown the body in beautiful position. And that's what's left. And now we're in the year 2020 and we are going backwards. It's a big problem.
What you showed today was powerful.
Thank you.
Some people can't take powerful.
Thank you.
Important questions. I'm afraid we have very little time before the next session, so I would like perhaps to give the floor to Artemis, so that we may conclude for today. But dear Artemis, may I return the mic?
I wanted to say something about the cultural exchange and what you have just discussed about the Muses. And what I really liked, you said, Iris, was about that we are all Muses. And that is also what probably has to change in general, that that everyone, not only artists as cultural producers, should become aware that everyone could be a creator. And Mark also showed in his presentation, everyone can be involved. Every of us showed us today that it's not a matter of material. Everyone can use a found piece of paper to become creative. Art is not an entertainment industry. Art is a creative. We have to understand not ourselves as creative producers, but in this whole ecology, every single person, every individual, every society is a part of this ecology. We are composing and composting, and I think that is very important to understand. Also, what I realized during the time of this crisis, how important art and artists became, not to get mentally ill, because suddenly everyone was aware that there is some inspiration, some artistic motivation, and that comes from the arts. And everyone can, you know, turn off the TV. Don't censor yourself and get creative on your own side.
Thank you. I'm afraid time, relentless one, is sort of compelling us to conclude now. Thank you for your beautiful expression, your so creative work. Thank you for starting this conversation. And please, let's continue this conversation. I hope in different forums, in different platforms, but certainly let's continue it. Thank you to all very much for this wonderful contribution to the 2020 Festival of the Muses.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.